So, Jim and Warren, welcome to Pastor Spotlight. We're going to be introducing their new book, Better Together, Making Church Mergers Work, which was just released. It's an updated version of a 2012 book by the same title. Jim, Warren, what did you share with our viewers today why you decided to republish this book?
Well, actually, we didn't decide. The publisher, Fortress Press, Lutheran Press, came to us and said, you know, there's such an increase and rise in mergers. Would you consider a new edition? And we said yes on one condition: if we can update, expand, and do some fresh research, including among the mainline community, to make it as fresh and relevant as possible. So it's not a revised edition. We don't recant but anything we said in the original edition, but we've learned so much more during the 8 years since it was published that we are delighted to bring a new edition out.
Warren, as I look at this book, I notice that you all have done a tremendous amount of research. Can you tell us how you stepped into this and then move into what your big takeaway is?
Yeah, there are layers of research. The most recent research, which we did in 2019, got 962 merger churches where we asked their story. Would you do it again? Did the joining church pastor stay? Talked about everything from facilities to money to why you did it. It was quite a lengthy survey. We were ecstatic to get such a good response, but that integrates with, we had done a national survey earlier about what % of churches across the nation merged. We had done earlier questions. And of course, we had dozens of personal interviews.
Big takeaway on this book was just first of all, the dramatic increase in mergers since we published our book in 2012. In 2012, the big takeaway from that book was that the multi-site church movement was the primary catalyst for these new kind of mission-driven mergers. And that was, they were the big beneficiary of this. What we saw 8 years later is that we're seeing not only our multi-site churches continue to benefit from the merger movement, that over 40% now of multi-site churches have acquired their facilities through a merger. 10 years ago, it was about 30%. So we're seeing a growth there. So that was still a big takeaway. But we're also seeing 20% of church planters are acquiring a facility by merging with an existing church. We're also seeing denominational and network leaders see that mergers are now a vehicle for church revitalization, for pastorless churches looking for a pastor, and for pastoral succession. And that mergers is becoming a viable option to address those opportunities and needs in local churches.
Warren, you do a lot of research in the church market. Do you have any sense about how many churches are in a position today to look to be merged with another church or to join another church because of the really negative trends that we've been seeing in churches for a long time?
We answer that question kind of humorously in the book, the expanded and updated edition, in that we say 100% of churches could consider a merger. And we have this little visual where it goes through like 7 stages of a church, from launch all the way to its final days as a viable congregation. And we show how at each point you could be either the lead church in initiating and setting the culture for a merger, or the joining church in initiating and joining the culture of another church to be better together. And so, yes, there are some aspects of that pathway that are more viable as mergers, but frankly, we try to cite examples all across the life spectrum of a church where a merger has benefited and started a new chapter and given a new burst of outreach and impact for Jesus.
Joe, we know there's about 320,000 Protestant churches nationwide. And all observers would conclude about 80% of those are stuck or struggling or in life support mode. Those are all churches that could benefit by merging with the 20% of churches that are strong and growing across the nation. And so we see that strong, stuck, and struggling churches all could be beneficiaries of merger.
So given that COVID is increasing the pace of change that was already taking place, what sense of urgency do you have for churches to carefully examine this as a viable strategy?
Jim, let me start.
Yeah.
We got an email. We surveyed a whole bunch of denominational leaders to say, hey, do you have a poster child merger church that we could interview and possibly include in the book? And one Lutheran bishop wrote the most interesting reply, which with his permission we put in the book. He said, you know, I've never considered mergers as a path forward. I've always thought it as, you know, prolonging the inevitable and just, you know, creating a consolidation that enables churches to hold their own for a little bit longer. And he said, I really need to think of mergers as a proactive way of growing, reaching out, and going forward. And that's what we hope will happen coming out of the pandemic, that churches that are saying, you know what, we're not satisfied with the impact we're having now. And sometimes it's triggered financially by saying we can't continue forward. But our hope and prayer has been that this will be considered, hey, this is an option. You know, you can talk about it, pray it through, talk with your denominational leadership if that's your decision-making process. But to be able to say, you know, could this be one of God's paths for us going forward?
So you've made the case that every church has an opportunity to consider this strategy, a merger strategy. What's the opportunity cost for failing to prayerfully think through this as an option for your church?
Joe, Warren and I wrote this first book and then the second edition with an overwhelming commitment to the purpose of the church, and every local church is to make disciples. It gets back to the mission that Jesus gave the church, his disciples, and to us today. Go and make disciples. That the church is the point of the spear, is a disciple-making organization. And that ultimately the gain and opportunity in merging is how do we help churches become more vibrant, more capable of fulfilling that mission of making disciples, making more and better disciples who make disciples. It's all about church multiplication. We believe every living thing that God has breathed the breath of life into is designed to reproduce and to multiply, to be a blessing, to reproduce, and to multiply.
Well, Jim, we echo those feelings here at Horizons. Our mission statement says that we're about helping the local church make disciples and fund ministry, because fundamentally, good generosity, good stewardship practices are a result of good discipleship.
We just believe that God has designed more for our church than just to survive or just to hang on. That every church's design has the capacity to be a vibrant, healthy, growing, reproducing, multiplying church. And so that's our motivation behind all of this. How do we help churches who are in desperate need of space and resources, and others who are in desperate need of a vibrant ministry? How can we connect those churches together where they could truly be better together in making more disciples who make disciples?
Jim, you brought to us today a chart from the Unstuck group. Would you unpack that for us?
Yeah, the chart, it shows the different cycles, life cycles, 7 life cycles that every church goes through. Actually, the conclusions, the data that I'll share with you came from our self-assessment tool that's on our website, the Unstuck group, that over 10,000 churches have completed in the last year. And so what we discovered is that about 20% of the churches are in that flourishing, growing, momentum growth, strategic growth, sustained health side of the equation. But about 80% of the churches across America are in maintenance, preservation, or life support mode. So we know that about 80% of the churches today, before COVID, were good candidates for a merger, either to get unstuck or to be rescued And so, but COVID is only accelerating the need and the opportunity for all those churches to consider a merger as an option going forward. Joe, every conversation that I have with the church when they're considering a merger, and they ask, should we be considering this? How do I know if this is right for our church or not? There's 4 questions I always ask them to ask of themselves. First of all, would our joining with this other church, would it make my congregation better than remaining separate? Could we accomplish more together than we could separately? The second question. A third question is, would our community be better served and if we join together? And then lastly, could the kingdom of God be further extended by joining together? Those 4 questions, if you can answer one or yes to any one of those or all of those, then you may be a good candidate to consider joining with another church.
In your book, you all introduce 9 circumstances most frequently used to motivate an independent church to become part of another church. Can you unpack those for us?
You know, these are different contexts that would provoke or invite a church to consider merging. First are just the churches that are mission driven. That is that they want to have a vibrant church to multiply their outreach and impact. And so they join with a church that is doing that. That's one reason. Another circumstance is economic. Many churches are in financial decline. They're not able to sustain themselves. And so that was the typical basis of mergers of the past. And that's still very much a reality. Then there are multi-site churches that are looking to launch locations, campuses, and communities where they have people coming to them from. And there's a declining church in the area or a church that just loves what that multi-site church is doing. That's another context for a merger. Many churches have facilities that they cannot maintain or sustain. And so, or they're underutilized and they want to, how do we maximize and utilize our facilities? How do we can't maintain them on our own, but if we join with another church that has the capacity, we could be better together that way and salvage this facility. Many times historic buildings, facilities would be in very expensive locations. If a church tried to buy some property or whatever, and here's a facility in a prime location that's empty, in decline, and then not far away is a church that needs space and facility, and so that's another context. Denominational leaders are discovering that they can strengthen their growing congregations and salvage their declining ones by bringing them together. They're in the same denomination network. Hey, let's look for the win-win here. You need facilities, we need revitalization or rebirth, and we can come together. That's another context for merging. Succession. There's a huge wave of retiring pastors over the next decade. And there's not as many young new pastors coming in to fill the ranks. And so how do we fill those pastorless churches or those churches that are looking for their successor? In a lot of ways, there's a lot less risk, Joe, to join with another church, another pastor on the other side of town that you already know fits in the culture, that's had a vibrant, successful ministry that's congruent with that community, versus hiring someone from across the country with the hope that they'll be a good fit. In a lot of ways, it's a lot less risky to join to get a new pastor through a merger, across town versus bringing someone from out of town. So we're seeing more and more of that. Then there are some churches that in the past have had splits. They've had painful, breaking away from one another. Maybe a decade later, there's a sense of, it would be really wonderful if we could be reconciled, and both for our 2 churches as well as for the community. And so we are seeing churches decide, hey, let's be reconciled, and then this maybe merger, maybe we got to come back together either in one location or in 2 locations. So we're seeing a reconciliation, a reuniting of church splits that happen. Church plants that maybe that was started by a church in the past and it's struggling, and it's got their DNA, it's kind of like their child, and that's another opportunity context for considering a merger. So those are some of the contexts that we are seeing across the country that are conducive to a merger conversation and a merger outcome.
You mentioned the multi-ethnic. I saw some research that Mark DeMoss from the Mosaic Network shared in an interview with us not very long ago, where he was talking about the progress that megachurches have made, larger churches have made in diversifying their worshiping community. I think it's now in the 20s. It's grown from around 11% to in the 20s in the past 10 years. And mainline
Actually,
churches,
Joe, can I jump in on that?
Yeah, do.
I wrote the article for the Outreach Top 100 issue on this
Yeah.
very topic. And over the last 20 years, large churches have grown from 11% being multiracial in the sense of 20% or more of the non-majority to today 58%. So the majority of megachurches are multiracial. They are leading the way in terms of, but the entire church population is moving more toward being multiracial by that definition. And mergers, we've got many merger stories in the book, and that Mark DeMoss and others have pointed us to elsewhere, to say, you know, here's a predominantly white congregation, a predominantly black congregation, where they have worked to say, you know what, let's model heaven on earth right now. The Acts, Revelation 7:9, that heaven is made up of every tongue and tribe and people. You know, what better way to demonstrate the kingdom of God and that bridges can come down than us merging. Those mergers are often a little bit harder, but can be just as fruitful.
Well, Warren, I appreciate you developing that with some additional research information. I know that this is an issue on a lot of people's hearts today, and a merger strategy can be an effective way to do that. A church who is monolithic in their racial makeup, joining a church who is not, is going to begin to help their church advance that cause. So if that's something on a church's mind, it is fascinating that this is one of the best strategies to becoming a multiracial church. Jim, anything in closing you want to share with us?
Thank you, Joe, for this interview. And yes, we feel like this release of our book at this time is a very, we did not know what was going to transpire a year ago when the publisher wanted to republish this in a paperback format and gave us the opportunity to upgrade and update our stories and our information, our tools. We've developed so many more things since our first book came out 8.5 years ago. But we are grateful for that opportunity. And our publisher even said, we're not releasing any new books this fall because of COVID, except for one, yours, because it's so timely and so going to be so needed. And we're already seeing that happen as well. So thank you for the opportunity to share with you today, Joe.
Thank you, Jim.